Pantera have taken their place as one of the seminal heavy metal bands of all time. Texas boys Vinnie Paul Abbott, Dimebag Darrell Abbott, and Rex Brown, along with New Orleans native Phil Anselmo, created groove metal and quickly joined the ranks of their musical heroes. Pantera flew the metal flag high. They kept metal alive by pushing the boundaries and stayed true to their roots, each album heavier and harder than the last. To this day, Pantera still have a loyal and dedicated fan base all over the world that will never forget them.
Pantera have written absolute classics. Any metal fan will name just like what they would consider anthems. What any self-respecting metal DJ at a club or on the radio would play, and whatever, and you're going to have to name some Pantera songs in there.
They were one of the bands that you didn't just, well, they're okay. No, I never found anybody in my entire life that said, yeah, they're all right. No, you either love Pantera and you're hardcore, or you hate them.
I think one of the reasons why Pantera always had such a fan base and such respect is because they were the one band that was metal the whole way through. I mean, Metallica eventually cut their hair and changed their songwriting. Most of those bands did, but Pantera only got more metal as it went along.
I think they were really loyal to their fans, so their fans were loyal to them. They never sold out. They did what they were going to do. They didn't change their lyrics or their music so that it could be played on the pop radio station. You know, they decided what they wanted to do, and they did it.
They were like a family, and I mean, and that extended on to the people around them, the crew and their friends, and you know, the people that supported them drove their van of band gear to the local bar or whatever when they were just, you know, here in town. Those guys still hang out with them.
You would go to concerts around town, and you would see them, you know, Vinnie and Dime, and you wouldn't really see Phil that much because he was kind of his own recluse kind of guy, from what I understand. But the rest of the guys, man, were just there, just rubbing elbows and hanging out with their fans.
Texas, the Lone Star State, the Wild Wild West. Although famous for being the backdrop to the assassination of a president and the setting of the world's most famous soap opera, Dallas enjoyed a healthy music scene in the 1980s, renowned throughout the South.
There's Southern hospitality and then there's Texas hospitality, and you know, people are a lot more polite. Even when you're mad at somebody, you can usually sell it over a drink or something, you know. I've had people who want to kick my ass countless times and we end up doing shots.
There's also a camaraderie that doesn't exist a lot of other places in the world. It's like, you know, musicians need to be here.
There seems to be a core of people who have been here for years, and you would see them at all the shows. It's just like a small, well, actually it's a large family.
Yeah, everybody's good friends, you know, and that's what it's all about. It's about going out and having a good time, you know, just getting right there, and, you know, nobody's special, you know what I'm saying? Like, we all...
Sure they are.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, we're all friends with everybody.
Yeah, there was a big music scene. Not anything like Austin or Seattle at the time, but there was a pretty good music scene going on in North Texas, Dallas-Fort Worth area.
There was always a pretty healthy scene around Dallas.
Yeah, exactly.
There was always, when the rock clubs got going, and back in the mid-'80s, and even before that, there was a good scene, but there was a chain of clubs, you know, you could travel around the Metroplex and have a good time.
In the late 1970s in Arlington, a suburb of Dallas, the earliest incarnation of Pantera was formed. Brothers Vince and Darrell Abbott joined forces with bass player Tommy Bradford and vocalist Donnie Hart. Terrence Lee soon replaced Donnie, and the four high school students began practicing songs by their heroes. Tommy Bradford begins the story.
The summer of 1979 is when we first met, and then carried it on all through high school. Vince and I met in marching band, believe it or not. I was a trumpet player, and he was a drummer, and we came together and learned of each other that, you know, Terry and I were starting to look for a drummer. We didn't like our drummer, and Vince and Darrell were looking for a new bass player, and so he and I met at summer band camp.
Vinnie, he was known as Vince back then, Abbott, was a star of the drum corps in high school, just the best drummer around. His dad had, when he started in the band in high school, he'd started to play tuba. He brought it home, and his dad was like, "You're never going to make a dime with that. Turn it back in and get some drums." Because his dad, Jerry, he was a country and western songwriter and performer, So he knew about the music business.
Terry and I showed up over at Vince and Darrell's house, and we started playing.
We started immediately jamming at Vince and Darrell's house out in the garage.
I got in the band, they said, you gotta wear spandex. I said, no way. But I eventually put on some freaking spandex.
There was wild stuff that went on in that house. Lots of things we weren't supposed to be doing. It was out of control. Vince and Darrell's house was party 24/7.
That was when Def Leppard's first album just came out. Nobody knew of Def Leppard. This was before, this was On Through the Night, before Photograph and all that stuff in the 80s came out. And we started covering and we sounded just like them. And plus they were only 2 years older than us, so we were excited about the fact that here's a band that's really big named Def Leppard, and they're doing great. They were kind of our mentors. Oddly enough, Terry and I were like, you know, we really don't want this little 14-year-old guitar player, which was Darrell. Obviously turned out to be one of the best guitarists in the world.
Passionate about music, Pantera took their band very seriously, covering songs by their heroes, writing songs of their own, and mastering their instruments.
Darrell kind of disappeared into his bedroom. Some will say for 6 weeks, some will say for 6 months. The point of the story is he came out and he could play like he could play. You know, he was, you know, Diamond Darrell Lance, as he called himself at the beginning, Dimebag Darrell, whatever you want to call him. He was already just a master of the guitar, and he was 15, skinny as could be, giant poodle haircut. You know, look at him, he looks like a microphone. In short order, Terry stopped playing guitar, just sang, because he couldn't, you know, he couldn't stand up to what Darrell was doing.
We'd play probably close to 2 or 3 hours a night, every night, and we'd play. We soundproofed Vince and Darrell's garage. We got a lot of tickets for excessive noise. What was it? Excessive loud music. We covered a lot of Cheap Trick, Judas Priest, Aerosmith, Van Halen, AC/DC, just all those bands in the late 70s, early 80s that would be considered soft rock now compared to some of the stuff, and even the stuff that Pantera played later.
I think their first gig was at the Roxy or the Ritz, I can't remember which, over in Dallas. Darrell was so young, his parents had to be there so he could get in, and he just won a new guitar, you know, from another contest. In fact, they would not allow him to do any more contests because he won them all. It was like, okay, Darrell's here, nobody else has to play.
This was the first Pantera tour shirt that we built, and it says, you know, Pantera. We actually went to the old t-shirt shops they had in the 70s where you could get the stencils. And I didn't even tell you about how we became with the name. I mean, we went through several names, and Pantera came up. It was originally named after the car. There's a Ford made a car called the Pantera, and I can't remember, Vince or somebody knew about it. So that was originally why we came up with Pantera. But then we learned more about the name Pantera and found out it was a cat. And so that's what we got this cat made, or it was already there because it was a stencil. But 1981 U.S. tour, which the U.S. tour was around the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Vince and Darrell's father, country and western songwriter Jerry Abbott, encouraged the boys in any way he could. His knowledge of the music industry and the fact he owned a recording studio, Pantego Sound Studios, would give the band a head start.
Jerry Abbott had a giant influence just because he owned a recording studio, Pantego Studios, out in, I guess it's in Pantego, but it's part of Arlington, basically.
Just a tiny little town between Arlington and Fort Worth. And we were back off the road at the end of a dead-end road, so there wasn't a lot of heavy traffic. But it basically was all about music. We didn't do any advertising. Matter of fact, we ran ads that said we don't jingle.
The guys could go in there and record when no one was in there, and Jerry would produce it and record it and all that stuff. So they had to step up on all those other bands too, so when they wanted to put out an original album, they already well comfortable with being in a studio, and when that red light comes on, being comfortable to play their stuff. I mean, they're pros at it well before anybody else was.
Usually Vince and I would lay down tracks together, and then it'd have to be Terry and Darrell would put, you know, the overdub.
You know, Jerry was their manager. He ran sound for them on the road, but even more important than that, he allowed them to actually play shows because Darrell was too young to even get into these clubs because he was 15, 16 years old. He was definitely the fifth member of the band.
Meanwhile, Darrell Abbott in particular was exhibiting a natural talent that would see him take his place as one of the best and most respected guitarists in the world. Jerry Abbott's business knowledge and production expertise was starting to rub off on young Vince.
Even then, you could tell that Vince and Darrell were destined to be rock stars at that point because they were passionate about it, and to the point where Darrell, he didn't have anything to do with girls back then, believe it or not. And he wasn't gay, but he just didn't have anything to do with girls because all he wanted to do was play his guitar, and he played his guitar all the time. And we used to joke about he'd just sleep with his guitar and wake up and start playing it.
Vinnie, on the other hand, was always more businesslike. He was like, let's get it done. You know, sure, we practice 7 nights this week, but we should have practiced longer. 5 of them. It's just there was never enough, and he was just really a driving force as far as that went. They had no ambition to do anything else. If it did not involve music, they would have never been happy. That's just the way it is.
Pantera continued to work hard on their music, and it looked like all their efforts were about to pay off.
We were rock stars in that little universe that we were in. We were burning it up. A bunch of skinny little kids dressed like girls and spandex jumping up and down, singing about heavy, scary stuff.
We had sent a demo tape to Tom Warner. I think he was with Warner Brothers at the time, and he liked it, but it came down between us and another band, and he chose the other band. We don't know for sure who it is, but that was about the time Motley Crue came around the scene, so it could have been a coincidence, or it could have been, but Tom Warner signed them, so it was right around that time. And after that, that's when I basically said, we were that close, we didn't make it, I'm going to college.
Very quickly after that, they got Rex Brown, who had been playing in another band.
And he'd heard about Pantera, and he always wanted to do it. So he went over and auditioned for him and started playing with him. In 1983, they decided to make a video. So they hired a video producer to come down. We were playing in Sherman. They ended up making it out of All Over Tonight. They decided to do something special at the end of the video, and Darrell had a guitar that was broken, and he put all this chain all over it and all kinds of stuff hanging off of it, put a plunger at the end of it, put his Gladiator stuff on, and it was out there, then he was playing, air guitar into that song, and at the very end of the video, you get a little glimpse of that. And with Darrell breaking the guitar and everything, it's just hilarious. He just was having a great time. Just typical Darrell.
Even though Pantera were writing and recording their own songs in the pop metal style of the day, it was cover bands who were most popular at the time, and Pantera became well known and loved on the southern circuit.
Original music wasn't exactly what people were looking for in those days. They wanted whatever was on the radio. They wanted Van Halen and Judas Priest and Kiss. The Abbott brothers were huge Kiss fans. Darrell would run around all the time in his Ace Frehley makeup, just, painted up in front of his mirror playing his guitar. One of the reasons they rose up so quickly through the ranks is they weren't just great at covering the songs, but they had actually come up with this kind of arena level spectacle. They had this guy named Ken Webster, who they nicknamed Pyro, and he came up with homemade pyrotechnics, came up with this homemade light system. He was a guy from the Air Force, and he kind of scrounged around the base, got these B-52 landing lights, these Bombay door lights, all these things. He rigged them up through his own digital sequencer, and so they had explosions, they had this massive light, just rivaling anything that was in an arena, and it was in these little tiny clubs. And so for a fraction of what you could get, for what you'd pay to go to this arena show, you'd get the same songs, the same sort of level of professionalism, and probably 10 minutes away from your house.
Yeah, they started out playing 3-hour sets of Metallica and Priest and Van Halen, and like nobody's business, and when they came to your section of town, You went, or you drive to Fort Worth. It didn't matter. But,
or if you were in your band playing out some night, sure enough, Dimebag would be right there. Come on, let's go.
Yeah, but the funniest part about it is he was Diamond Darrell.
But that was the thing to do. If you could get an opening slot with Pantera, you know, that was
the gig.
That was the gig. We're playing with Pantera. Oh, and then, you know, it was a guaranteed crowd, and it was on. You know,
always a good time.
Always.
This is a pair of Darrell / Rex / they made me wear them. Spandex, yes. And I don't know what size that waist is, but there's very, very few people that I'm sure could even stretch it out, you know, enough to get it on.
By 1986, Pantera had recorded 3 albums at Pantego Studios. Metal Magic, Projects in the Jungle, and I Am the Night were all released on their own record label, Metal Magic Records, with the help of Jerry Abbott. By this time, the characters of the band had formed. Terence Lee became known as Terry Glaze, Vince became Vinnie Paul, and Darrell, the youngest member of the band, changed from Diamond Darrell to Dimebag.
It took them 8 to 10 years before they really became big, and so they played a lot of small gigs in remote areas around Texas and Oklahoma that a lot of people don't know about, and they probably don't want to remember it because it was, you know, it was rough. And actually, from my understanding, that's how Darrell got his nickname. Is somebody had asked him, you know, you must be making a lot of money. He said, no. He said, I don't even make enough money to afford a dime bag. It's a measurement of some sort of drug. The irony of that is Darrell never did drugs.
That year, Metallica released their seminal album, Master of Puppets. It was clear that metal was evolving. Vinnie and Dimebag were inspired by this harder sound and began to move away from the pop metal style they had championed. This did not fit with Terry Glaze's vocal style, and he soon parted company from the band. Pantera began the search for a new lead singer. One name that kept coming up was Phil Anselmo, who was already well known on the New Orleans hardcore scene.
They knew, and I knew right off the bat, the first time we had ever jammed, I had never played with a band this tight. I mean, these guys were stunning, you know, it was like, my God, you know, this is unbelievable.
They were looking at Craig, our singer, and we kept on going, oh, dude, we got this guy in New Orleans, Phil, because Phil was a couple of years younger than me, and he was in a band called Razor White, and that was sort of Hagen's competition. So we were like going, hey, we'll introduce you to Phil, which was like kind of funny because they just loved Phil right off the bat because Phil was he knew, right? He had Phil Core tattooed on his hands at 14, you know? He used to come over to my house and go, dude, I'm gonna be a big rock singer one day. I'm like going, dude, it's not that easy, but he did, you know? He just blew up. He knew it from the beginning.
And people would always tell him about this kid from Razor White that, you know, man, that's gotta be your new singer. That's got to be, you know, it has to be, and they were telling Phil that too. So Phil called the Abbotts up. They brought him down here, and basically, you know, right away it clicked, and they'd found the guy they were looking for, and in January of '87 they played their first show together.
They were headed that direction already, though. There's no doubt about that.
When Phil came in, though, he focused that energy.
Yeah, he just reinforced it that, yeah, I'm the dude, and you know, and of course he had Darrell and Vinnie and Rex, and I mean, it was perfect, you know. I mean, we all were like, at that time going, wow, watching them just blow up, you know, and it happened quite fast.
It seemed like before that it was one big party. The energy that Dime and Vinnie and Rex had, you know, after Phil had joined the band, before that, they all had it, because Terry was like that, and they were just crazy party. But when Phil came, you still had all that party going on, but you had him in front. Stronger than all. And
he is who he is on stage, and you believe that about the rest of the band as well. The framework for Pantera existed before Phil Anselmo was there.
Pantera recorded and released the album Power Metal in 1987, their first with Phil Anselmo on vocals. The album merely hinted at what was to come. Even after releasing 4 albums, the band struggled to find the right recognition and distribution. This changed after Atco representative Mark Ross was stranded in Dallas after a hurricane and caught a Pantera show. He signed the band there and then.
These four guys come on stage and they start spinning their hair like, oh boy, what are we in for here? But then Darrell just launches into one of his riffs, and then Phil opens that mouth of his, and this just roar comes out that just is overpowering from the get-go.
If you have to name the one point, it would have to be they got signed by Atco. I mean, obviously, that's the major step that most people do not achieve.
Getting Atco, I mean, they're part of Atlantic Records. That was enormous because they had access to new touring partners and they had access to, new distribution.
In 1990, Pantera recorded and released their major label debut, Cowboys from Hell, at Pantego Studios, with producer Terry Glaze at the controls, the beginning of a long collaboration. A significant change to the pre-90s Pantera sound, Cowboys from Hell is considered by fans and critics to be Pantera's proper debut album.
How about the first time you heard Cowboys from Hell record? Start to finish. Oh my God!
There's no reason to listen to Pantera before Cowboys from Hell. Whatever anybody says, however purist anybody thinks they are, anybody who listens to those albums thinking that, no, that's the true Pantera, that's the old school thing, that's the thing they need to get back to, is just absolutely dead wrong. I mean, there's no reason to go back to that because that really was their prenatal stage. There are slight hints of what they were going to do later on, but there's nothing before the 90s that's really worth holding on to be honest. A lot of bands will have that period where it's something that's best forgotten. In their case, it's definitely best forgotten.
When I first had the impression of Pantera with Cowboys from Hell, heavy metal, just balls out, rock and roll. And then I come to town and I'm up at the Z-Rock Network one day, and the program director was showing me some of the albums, their 4 previous albums, where they were all glammed out. And that was like, whoa, that's Pantera? I mean, it was like night and day. So it seemed to me that maybe they were pretty smart in the sense that they were adapting themselves to what was going on in the musical trends, and not to the sense of selling out, because they've always stayed true to their backbone of who they are. But just the outward appearance kind of seemed to change a little bit as time went on.
People maybe want to look back at, the 80s and then the 90s and see that as calculated. I don't think it was really calculated. I mean, I think that's the direction they were going in anyway. Did they change their style of dress? Maybe. But, I mean, I think that sound was always going to happen for them at some point, just because that's what Vince and Darrell were really into.
I don't think Pantera, all respect to them, were really quite astute enough to really think about market forces or just how the music was going to appeal. I think they were just doing what was right for them. This is a time where music was diverging. People were listening to more people wearing cardigans, playing acoustic guitars than anything else. And so in a way you could kind of see Pantera fans really being the people who had an allergic reaction to that. People at the absolute opposite side of the spectrum who were just looking for something else in music, and that was just a kind of honesty that I think a lot of other bands didn't necessarily portray because they didn't have the full range of emotions that Pantera did.
Cowboys from Hell struck a chord with metal fans the world over. The album was to change the face of metal forever and included the anthem Cemetery Gates.
Cowboys from Hell is just one of the ultimate metal records. Cemetery Gates, all respected Dio, is absolutely one of the finest vocal performances ever in metal, period. Just the sort of dynamic that Phil Anselmo has as a vocalist, where he can just go from the growls to the masculine kind of screaming, and just like this sort of falsetto that's really beautiful and packed with emotion is just absolutely unparalleled. Nobody else has done it as well since he did that song.
Cemetery Gates was had that slow ballady acoustic guitar kind of thing, and then it was just a really good crunchy sound that was kind of, there was other people doing it, but these guys for somehow just kind of brought it all in and made it their own. It was just great stuff.
It took that hard sound that they had, and it combined that with Phil's background in the hardcore scene, which was a total different kind of vocal style, and then mixed all that in with this Texas blues influence. It was kind of like ZZ Top, just like this muscular version of ZZ Top. So it still had that kind of swing and that sort of groove and that songwriting to it, while still being just, you know, massively heavy and incredibly aggressive. From Darrell's guitar to Phil's vocals, I mean, that just immediate reaction. It was just, you know, just visceral. And, you know, it just was absolutely different than anything out there.
You can almost say that Pantera had two beginnings, in a way. You know, they had their initial beginning and the one that people became aware of with Cowboys from Hell, where obviously their identity seemed to alter ever so slightly. I mean, as talented as Dimebag was as a guitarist, when you listen to Cowboys from Hell, certainly their attitude had changed. Phil Anselmo had brought this whole kind of masculine aggression to it that people hadn't really heard before. And all of a sudden they really did become the kind of the vanguard of a whole lot of bands that all of a sudden became vents for aggression.
Cowboys from Hell was the launch Pantera had been waiting for, and they quickly found themselves sharing the stage with their heroes, supporting Metallica, Judas Priest, and AC/DC on world tours.
They were going from, you know, the headlining the bars tours to, they were opening, I think at that point, I think they opened for Ozzy at some point on that one. They were picking up some pretty good slots, you know, with some name international acts, and getting a lot of exposure. And you know, MTV picked them up. Headbangers Ball was playing them like crazy at the time.
They started sharing the stage with all the big guys that they had been their heroes coming up. And the thing is, they didn't change. At least when I saw them, they weren't any different. They were still Darrell and Vinnie to me.
They were always fans of music in general to begin with, and especially the old school metal. You know, that was their heroes, Kiss, you know. Growing up, that's all those guys listened to, and they ended up, you know, doing some really cool tours with those people. And it was always a thrill, you know, especially for Dimebag. Him and Vinnie were like little kids, man. It was like, wow, we're out here on tour with these guys. And it was really a cool testament to how much of they weren't doing it for the money. They weren't doing it for the fame. They were doing it because that's what they like to do, is make music. And also, they're just fans, you know.
I think they handled success very, very well. I think they did. And I think they started grooming themselves to handle success from day one. And I think that was partly their dad as well. Not knowing whether they were really going to achieve it or not, you need to be ready for this.
And there's all kinds of stories about them coming through town and just basically destroying whatever arena they were in. Not them, but the crowd, because they got them so fired up that they would actually destroy the seats, just ripping them apart, and the mosh, and just going crazy.
We had one of those breathalyzers on the road. Dime brought it in from somewhere, and so everybody would, you know, see how drunk you are. Oh, dude, you're not nearly drunk enough, you know? Pour him another shot.
And there were about 3,000 people, about 1,000 of which had just erupted into a mosh, and I'd never been more scared in my life, because I was 16. And I was literally just hearing bone on bone and just like flesh hitting the ground and everything. And Phil Anselmo was just on the stage, just looking like this absolute shirtless demigod. You know, he had his tattoos out, this and that, looked completely evil. He was like blowing snot on the stage. Dimebag was just going absolutely crazy on his guitar, and I'd never seen anything like that in my life. And I was already into death metal. I was already into my really heavy shit, but there's just something that was so much heavier about the way that Pantera played that they made the crowd completely kick off.
In 1992, Pantera recorded Vulgar Display of Power, their last at the beloved Pantego studios. It was this record that showcased a new subgenre, groove metal, and included anthems such as Walk and Mouth for War. To the fans' surprise, the album debuted at #1 on the Billboard Chart, and Pantera were championed by MTV and received extensive radio play.
Mouth for War is an incredibly aggressive song. You just don't expect people to be listening to it on their commute into work.
They had just finished recording Vulgar Display of Power, and they came down to the show where we were in the afternoon when we were loading in and brought us a pre-release tape so that we could listen to their new stuff. And we just kind of all stood around in the parking lot going, wow, this is it. And it was. And I think that's the one that really pushed it on in front.
You really saw the spillover into Vulgar Display of Power, because that's where, you know, this sort of critical mass they'd built up, like, just exploded into Vulgar Display of Power. But, you know, that's what really was like, all right, this band, here to stay, they're stars. And, you know, I think that's their best record. I think You know, they'd gotten their style down, they knew what they wanted to do, they had enough freedom, basically, that they could do exactly what they wanted to do on that record.
1992, 93 might have been where Pantera were at their absolute purest. I mean, this was the Camelot before the Round Table broke and Lancelot fucked Guinevere, in a manner of speaking, simply because it was them at their most innocent and at their most successful as well.
Pantera were not the kind of band to rest on their laurels. They returned in 1994 with Far Beyond Driven, their heaviest album yet. Far Beyond Driven continued the groove metal approach Pantera had created, but in a more extreme direction.
I remember one of the main thoughts going into that record was we have to be heavier than Vulgar. This has to be a heavier record. And I was thinking to myself, how is that possible? You know, how do we do that?
Engineer Sterling Winfield began his long collaboration with Pantera on this ambitious album.
When Terry called and wanted to finish their album Far Beyond Driven, and I was assistant engineer on that record. One of the things that I absolutely loved about, especially about Darrell and Vinnie, always trying to top themselves, always trying to better themselves and make the next album heavier, make it even more frightening than the last one, you know, so that people just, you still hear it's them. You know it's them coming a mile away. I think they achieved it every time they made a record, you know. It just got heavier and heavier, and it grew, it progressed, you know, it matured, it went from one thing to another, but all albums were always great and always music masterpieces in my eyes.
Far Beyond Driven divided critics, but the fans loved it, and it hit #1 both in the USA and Australian album charts, the first metal album ever to do so.
That was the most abrasive record I could ever imagine, and it went and blew up the charts at #1 and just scared everybody, which was great.
I think there was a necessity for Pantera to release an album like Far Beyond Driven simply because they wanted to show people that they weren't softening up. This is a thing that you see happening with a lot of metal bands that are accused of selling out once they're successful for doing nothing other than following their own instincts. The reaction is, well, let's make it heavier, let's make it less appealing in a way. Even though, ironically enough, that was an extremely succcesul album.
Because Vulgar, everybody thought, how could they get any heavier? How could they do any better than that? And they did. I mean, it was amazing. It was just, I still get chills thinking about it, you know, about how, watching that whole process of mixing down that album, watching Terry and them do their thing. It was amazing to watch it go down.
Because all the magazines you'd read and see would say, overnight sensation, Pantera. You know, we're like, we've been out slaving on the road for 4 hard years and 7 years in the nightclubs before that. It was a pretty exciting time.
Pantera have all my respect for not doing that, for not catering to that, certainly. But at the same time, they made a mistake because they also got away from what they were really good at doing, which is just writing really good songs. Songs that you want to mosh to, songs that you want to punch the air to, or just honk your horn to when you're stuck in traffic. That's what they're all about. It's just appealing to like really base aggression in people. And it's not to say they don't write beautiful ballads. There's some really amazing things. I mean, Hollow is an absolutely beautiful song, but when they're at their best is when they're sounding mean. And Far Beyond Driven just sounded a bit too technical, a bit up its own ass.
I think they really wanted to prove to everybody that, you know, they weren't going to let a little bit of success go to their heads, and they weren't going to start, you know, making these, you know, nice clean videos or making these songs that were meant for the radio. I don't think they ever thought they were going to be on the radio, and that was a surprise to them.
The thing that I really think they only cared about really was that the fans loved it. That's who they're making the record for, themselves and for the fans, you know, and that was what they really cared about. And if somebody gave them a bad review or they panned it or whatever, I really think that they just went, oh, well, you know, a million other people love it, you know. So that's what they really cared about, that and putting on a monster show.
For metal, to have a band like Pantera come out and enter the charts at #1, it just showed you that there's no way you can't kill this, because there will always be a band that's going to fly that flag in the face of everything else. And Pantera was the band in the 90s that did that you could actually say saved metal.
After touring Far Beyond Driven, Pantera decided to take a break, and Phil Anselmo headed back to New Orleans. he recorded an album with his long-term side project Down and embarked on a short tour. This raised doubts about Phil's commitment to Pantera.
There was a lot of pressure on the band, both internally as a result of people's proclivity to party and do everything else, and externally as well. There's a lot of pressure on them to produce, and the best thing a band can do at that time is just kind of have a break and just get away from all of it.
Phil Anselmo was the kind of guy who would just always need something to do, and I don't think he wanted to just sit around New Orleans, you know, just twiddling his thumbs or whatever, and so, you know, he got together with the guys that he had kind of grown up playing with or being in the same scene with, and Down did its own thing, and I think that's probably when some of the tensions in the band started, because Down, I mean, I don't think any of the guys knew what Down was going to be. It was much more of a big thing than I think they thought it would be. And certainly, you know, toward the end of the band, when he had not only Down, but also Superjoint Ritual, and was still working on these other things. I mean, Superjoint Ritual even was like a fairly decent-sized band, and, you know, his focus off Pantera was certainly wavering, whereas these other three guys, it was Pantera, 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 you know. They never would have, you know, I don't think they ever would have ended the band. I think they even waited around for Phil longer than they probably should have.
Someone like Phil Anselmo sits backstage at a festival, at a show, talks to musicians, says, yeah, this would be good, let's do this sometime, whatever. And he'll follow up on it. Some of his side projects are half-assed, some of them aren't. Down are absolutely one of the greatest bands in the history of metal. That's nothing to sniff at, because Phil Anselmo is an incredibly talented musician. It made sense for him to go off and try other things.
Pantera's next album, The Great Southern Trendkill, was recorded at Dimebag's new home studio, Chasing Jason, in Arlington. However, Phil Anselmo stayed in New Orleans to record vocals. It seemed the band were not as close as they once were. Phil's lyrics tackled drug abuse and suicide, and his vocal style was darker than ever.
Phil has said in interviews repeatedly that if Pantera weren't a metal band, they'd be a Southern blues band, and they'd be playing acoustic blues. The thing is, anyone who listens to Johnny Cash knows that that's heavy music. It's not about how hard you hit the drum, it's just about the weight of the lyrics, and that's the kind of gravity that Pantera were trying to move toward.
All of the instrumentation was done at Dime Studio, Chasing Jason, which we still use. Terry would leave here and go to New Orleans to record Phil's vocals, and then they would marry it all up and get it all together, and then they ended up mixing the whole thing in L.A.
He would do his vocals, and then I would bring him back to Texas after 2 weeks, and they would hear him. So there was more of a disconnect between the two. It was the only way we could work at that time.
I mean, it was obvious they were in decline creatively. And that's not to say that they didn't have more albums in them, but certainly they'd been going for too long. And the thing is internally, if you read any interviews around the time, you begin to sense that they just didn't like each other.
It causes isolation. It causes your entire lifestyle to change. And at that point, Pantera was gigantic, and I had a job to do. Through pharmaceuticals or anything to get me up on that damn stage and desperately not feel that pain. I would drink an entire bottle of Wild Turkey before we went on to just be numb, which of course was affecting my performances and putting some worry into the band, you know?
The press speculated that all was not well with Pantera, and it was while the band was on tour that the situation became clear. On July 13th, 1996, after playing a show in Dallas, Phil Anselmo collapsed of a heroin overdose. It emerged Phil was also suffering a recurring back injury, which caused him severe pain, and he later became addicted to painkillers.
So I didn't really see it, but I knew something was going on, and it didn't really hit me until the night that he passed out there at the Starplex here in Dallas. And then I was like, that's what's been going on. So, you know, you could feel it. It was a vibe, but you couldn't really tell, you know. They weren't speaking out about it.
Just real uncomfortable, man. It was just what the fun was gone, you know. The unity that we once had wasn't there. At the time, I didn't know anything about heroin. I had no clue what it was.
You could see other projects were in the works. The wheels were turning. I was like, what can I do after this? Because this is getting close to being done. And you can kind of feel that everywhere.
Phil Anselmo has a drug habit that's been well publicized, and that's going to cause a strain in any kind of band. It's no secret that Dimebag and Vinnie like to party as well. But the fact is when a band doesn't record in the same studio, they can't actually be around each other. You've got Phil Anselmo recording in Louisiana, got the rest of the band some other place. That's a sign that they really are just starting to look at their music like a product. And it's not to say that they were that cynical or that they were really trying to cheat anyone out of their money or anything like that. But a band that doesn't play together just isn't really a band.
You never knew what Phil was going to get on stage. Some nights you'd get the Bulldog, and other nights you'd get the dude on 12 Summers or whatever he was on and laying on his back screaming in the mic. You know, it was embarrassing.
Despite this turbulent time, Pantera's success rolled on, and Cowboys from Hell, Vulgar Display of Power, and Far Beyond Driven went platinum in 1997. With Phil Anselmo attempting recovery and the rest of the band back in Arlington, the remaining members busied themselves with mixing and releasing a live album, Official Live 101 Proof. With Vinnie Paul now confident in a producer role, this would spell the end of their long collaboration with Terry Glaze.
We had a really good time going through the tapes, and Vinnie would sit there and we'd piece it together in the tape machine and edit it together where it would flow. He was just really good. And he was like, man, I don't think we need Terry, you know, we can do this, man, we can run this place. Vinnie kind of stepped up and said, well, I feel like I want to produce the next record. And you know, he was telling Dime, you know, you and me can produce and we'll get Sterling to engineer and we'll just do it that way. And of course, I'm just sitting there going, hell yeah, you know, here's my chance to step up. So that's pretty much what happened, you know, and Terry was super fine with that.
Phil Anselmo returned to Pantera, and the band toured for the remainder of the 90s, playing Ozfest and receiving 2 Grammy nominations. Pantera saw in the new millennium by recording and releasing Reinventing the Steel, much to the relief of fans. But this would be Pantera's last album.
It was something else, man. It was quite a ride. We worked on that thing for about a year, you know. It was right at a year. It's probably about 11 months, something like that. But it was fun, yeah, because it was, you know, no holds barred, let's go, let's do this, and we got down there every day, and we'd sit down there and chop away at this thing and make sure that it was the best that it could be, you know, the next plateau for Pantera.
I mean, it was ambitious at times, and it just had just like this absolutely towering sort of technicality. And obviously there's Dimebag's virtuosity there. I mean, it had all the elements of a Pantera album, but it just didn't really have the soul.
You know, Reinventing the Steel was them discovering their love for each other and their love for their influences. And I think, you know, that definitely could have catapulted them into the 2000s. But, you know, it wasn't to be.
The reunion was short-lived, and events soon turned sour for Pantera. Phil Anselmo focused on Down and was joined by Rex Brown on bass.
There's a bunch of he said, she said nonsense that was going on, and I didn't get in the middle of it. A lot of it was nothing but whore. So at a certain point, there's no going back. You know, absolutely none.
We were sitting there rotting away. 2 of the best musicians on the face of the earth that play that kind of music were sitting there and having to take it in the face. No future, no nothing, just sitting there wondering what the is happening.
A war of words broke out in the press, and Pantera officially split in 2003.
I was always under the impression that they were past their rough patch, you know, the whole thing with what happened during the Trendkill tour. And I was just like, man, this band is just the best, you know, and they'll never quit. They'll keep going until the wheels fall off, you know, until something happens, you know. And well, that just wasn't the case. It had a lot to do with half the band wanting to go in one direction and the other half of the band wanting to go in a completely other direction. It got really confining, I think, for believe it or not, for Vinnie and Darrell. They just kind of were starting to get pigeonholed and pushed into a corner to where they only had so much room to write and express themselves. And so I think there was a lot of that going on, and getting their creativity squashed.
There was a lot of stuff going on in the press where it was obvious that things between them were not good, whatever. It's just the problem was that the way it played out in the press, I think caused a lot of people to just kind of think that it was just impossible for them to actually resolve their differences. When I actually think it was. If they'd just been able to sit down in a room together, if Phil could have cleaned up, if other members of the band might have just tried to intervene or something like that, that would have been possible. It was obvious that there was a massive communication breakdown.
You know, Vinnie would come in and go, well, guess what happened today, you know, and Phil would say something derogatory on the internet about Darrell and Vinnie, and it got really hurtful, you know, and it was really starting to get on me too, you know. I was like, why is that dude saying those things, you know? That's not true, and where did this all come from to begin with? We had no idea this guy felt like this at this point. Because after we had done the very last Pantera show in Japan, everything was great. Everything was super.
Vinnie Paul and Dimebag decided to make their side project, Damage Plan, official. They recorded an album and organized a tour.
Damage Plan started in 2004, I think, officially, and they were sort of rising up the ranks, but they were, you know, there was something about the sort of alchemy between Phil and the Abbott brothers that is obvious from listening to Damage Plan, you know, that didn't have. It wasn't necessarily just a bad band, but they were going to, I don't know if they never were going to be as big as Pantera.
When it was released, pretty much every critic, including myself, said, it's good, but will Pantera not just get back together already? Because that's what everybody wanted to see.
On December 8th, 2004, events at a Damage Plan show at Alarosa Villa in Columbus, Ohio, broke any hope of a reconciliation.
The show had just started. They were in the first song, really. And I've seen the tape, and it's just kind of, it's weird because you hear from the news reports exactly how it happened. You kind of figure it out in your head, but then we see it on video. It's something else.
25-year-old Nathan Gale jumped on stage with a gun during the show and opened fire, killing Dimebag, his bodyguard Jeff Mayhem Thompson, fan Nathan Bray, and club employee Erin Hulk, wounding tour manager Chris Poluska and drum technician John Brooks, before being shot dead by Officer James Niggemeyer.
Mayhem Thompson, their bodyguard, he was on Darrell's side of the stage, but he moved over to the other side of the stage right before Nathan Gale got up there. So instead of being able to head him off at the pass, he was now in the position of having to chase him. And nobody really, you know, there's stage divers at all these shows. Nobody really knew that was going to happen. So Nathan Gale runs up on stage. He gets in front of the drum riser. He pulls a gun out and puts it into, you know, firing position. Darrell had gone kind of around the side of the drum riser. He's playing his guitar. He's just hair in his face, just doing what he does. And, you know, Nathan Gale just kind of surprised him, put him in a headlock, and shot him in the head. And then shot him as he went to the ground, shot him again. And you see on the tape, Chris Poluska, their tour manager, he runs out to try to stop him. He gets shot in the chest. Mayhem runs over to stop him. He gets shot too. And then there's silence, and it's just pretty eerie. And they're kind of off stage, and you look at the crowd, and the crowd, like, for the most part, I mean, I think they just thought it was a joke. I thought it was a big goof, and you know, you see the gun go off. It almost looks like a cap gun. There's a little bit of smoke, but it just doesn't seem real. I mean, I've never had a gun fired around me like that before. And maybe it was, you know, you kind of see the fans, and they kind of have this kind of like, some are kind of even laughing because they don't know what's going on. But there's you know, there are people up front who kind of see what's going on. One of them climbs over the barrier, and he goes to try to help. I think he thought he was helping Darrell, but it was Mayhem laying on the stage, and he gets shot too. And then it's quiet again, and this whole thing takes 3 minutes, and then and a few more shots get fired off, and then there's a huge boom, and it's Officer Niggemeyer And he had blown off, I guess he had blown off Nathan Gale's head with a shotgun. He had one of the Pantera crew in a headlock, and he was, I think, trying to get out the back with a hostage. And Niggemeyer comes running to where the camera had been set up, and he's like, "You guys are all my witnesses, I had to do it." And he's not a cop at that point, he's just like a freaked out 31-year-old guy who just shot a man.
Probably from about 2 o'clock in the morning to about 7 o'clock in the morning. I bet I got a dozen phone calls from different people, different tours, different bands that I had worked with that somebody had just found out, and they were calling everybody that they knew, and no sleep that night.
It was amazing to me how much that affected me at that point. I felt like it was just devastating. And the first person I wanted to call was Terry Glaze, and I called him, and he had heard about it. And he was calling all the people he knew, because we were all frantically trying to figure out what was, because all we were getting was from the news, and this was early in the morning. I guess it happened at 2 or something in the morning, Ohio time, and this was about 6 o'clock in the morning here when the news was really starting to cover it around here. And at that point we didn't know if he was dead or not. There was speculation that he was still alive, that he had survived it, and so we were just frantically calling each other. And I actually called Rex, and Rex was like, "Dude, I haven't talked to you in 12 years. And I'm like, "Yeah, but I need to know what's going on." And so it was amazing how we all kind of came together. It hurt, and I was really surprised, because I hadn't really talked to Darrell in probably 5 years. But like I said, it felt like I just was seeing flashes of the kid that I played with in the 80s. And it was like, I couldn't believe it.
He died with a guitar in his hands in the middle of like a solo. So I don't think he would have, he died doing what he loves and had no idea it was coming. I mean, I think he was dead before he even hit the ground, even though he got shot a few more times. I think Nathan Gale had rushed the stage at a Cincinnati show like months before, and they had to drag him off the stage, and they didn't find a gun on him at that point, but he knocked over some lighting equipment, caused a few $1,000s worth of damage. The damage plan guys decided to not press charges because they didn't really want to go up with the hassle. It was a couple $1,000, it wasn't a big deal. Now, I don't know if that would have stopped what happened. I mean, I don't know if he would have just got a slap on the wrist or whatever. He was just crazy. I mean, he used to tell people that Pantera stole lyrics from him. I don't think the security situation would have changed much. I mean, he hopped the fence anyway. If that guy wanted to do something like that, he would have found a way.
Dimebag Darrell Abbott was buried in Moore Memorial Gardens Cemetery, Arlington, in a themed kiss casket donated by Gene Simmons. A public memorial service was attended by thousands of fans, and his private funeral by his heroes.
You hear the stories at Darrell's funeral when Eddie Van Halen showed up, and he actually had a phone call that he had left on his voicemail from Darrell, because Darrell and Vince went and saw them play in, I believe it was Lubbock. They played a show in Lubbock, and Eddie played it, but you could tell that Darrell sounded like this little kid that was just like, you're the best, Eddie, you're the best. It was great, it was a magical show, it was awesome. Terry and I were standing at the funeral, and when Eddie was up there talking, I leaned over to Terry and told him, I said, "You know what, I can promise you, if Darrell would have known back in the day that Eddie Van Halen was going to speak at his funeral, he said, 'Shoot me now, I want to be dead,' because he is so in love with Eddie Van Halen." And it was very powerful that Eddie was there, and it was an amazing thing to see him and see how he spoke of Darrell. We knew Darrell was a great guitar player, but we didn't know he had the respect that he did across the industry.
Throughout his life, Dimebag had been a champion of Dean guitars and even collaborated with the company on his own range of signature guitars. He was to be buried with his first ever Dean guitar, which he won in a competition when he was 14. Eddie Van Halen had other ideas.
Eddie Van Halen showed up with a black Charvel that he had, the black guitar that many people have seen with the yellow stripes on it. He showed up with that, and they actually laid it in the casket with him. That was breaking down, and I was going, wow. I said, this is amazing. I'm sitting there crying, and I don't even, you know, I haven't talked to him in that long, but you realize how close we really were, even though we were far apart. It became more evident when I saw Vince at the funeral. Both of us just broke down when we saw each other, and it was pretty emotional.
It was clear that Dimebag was well loved, respected, and missed. A good old Texas boy who loved music and stayed a true fan at heart.
He was just the most fun-loving, genuinely nice guy. I mean, he won't say he's a saint, but he was just, you know, just loved life, loved people. He was just, you know, talked to, you know, 50 people, and they all just loved him. He just, ringleader, didn't really ever have a bad word for anybody.
When he was up there doing a solo, he's just playing this ear-ringing, blood-curdling solos, but he had a smile on his face. And I think that's what drew people to him, is he always just was happy, a happy guy. Darrell, you could just tell he just loved the crowd, and you could just tell he thanked them.
When I covered his memorial service in Arlington, I went through the line. I was originally supposed to do some kind of man on the street thing, and, you know, sort of gauge reaction why people were all here. And there's a few thousand people online, and I talked to a few dozen. Every single person had a story, like a personal story about drinking with Darrell at a bar or doing shots with him. Not just like I saw him at Starplex and it was awesome. It was like, you know, Darrell came to see my band and we did shots. Darrell came into this bar I work at, you know.
Story after story, it was all these guys, these big name guys from Anthrax, Ozzy, you know, Judas Priest, and each one of them had a story of how Darrell pranked them in some form or fashion. And I was like, I could come up there and give you a long list of the pranks he used to do back when we were in high school.
But if I'm just sitting here doing something like this, you know, and I'll be sitting here doing my thing, and I'll look over here and I've got this little picture of Dime right here, so I can stare at it sometimes, and I'll giggle because I'll think of something he did, you know, just, it's silly stuff, but, you know, there was a lot of good times, man, a lot of good times.
As Vinnie Paul had only ever played in a band with his brother, it was unclear whether he would ever play in another band again. He bounced back with a new band, Hell Yeah, and returned to the studio to record an album.
The first night was the hardest. Vinnie had a real rough time, the minutes leading up to when we were actually going to start recording. And I wasn't as bad off as Vinnie, because he was like really upset at first. Not upset, but he was like trying to calm himself, you know, his nerves and everything, and I was kind of doing the same. That first night was absolutely magical. I mean, immediately it was like magic, and all the music just started flowing night after night after night, and it was a very magical experience too, for all of us, you know, everybody else included. It was something else to watch them just sit in there and jam, and then within hours have a complete song. Another one of them cold chills moments, you know, when you know someone's looking over your shoulder, you know someone's there with you, and it was really, really cool experience.
Dimebag's life and legacy is celebrated in Dallas each year with the annual Ride for Dime, a charity motorbike ride and concert organized by friends.
The Ride for Dime idea came up like in March of 2005. There was a few of us on the damageplan.net message board that wanted to find some way to honor Darrell. When somebody mentioned, well, why don't we do a motorcycle ride and see if we can raise a little money. We put it towards the Dimebag Memorial Fund. On August 20th, 2005, we had our very first ride. And we noticed that once the ride was over with, suddenly we started getting all these inquiries about it. You know, why didn't we know about it? We want to be part of it. And they said, you know, what about us people without motorcycles? How can we be part of it? So we decided, well, you know, let's add a concert to it next year.
It's a way for us here locally, us motorcyclists, to remember Dimebag and some of the other people that have perished that day. In fact, one of the guys that died with Dimebag on stage was a member of the Clear Channel Radio family here in Dallas. Jeff Mayhem Thompson. Being able to tributize them and remember them with the Ride for Dime is pretty special for us Texan residents, you know, and motorcyclists, and it gives us a chance to give back to something that Dime would have been appreciative of, is the Little Kids Rock, and that's an organization that helps put music back where it belongs, which is in the public schools. We left Stroker's Ice House, which is also a local motorcycle dealer, kind of a cool place to hang out and meet up with your other biker friends. We got on the freeway there close to Stroker's, and we hightailed it out to Arlington. Once we got to Arlington, we got picked up by a police escort, and they took us into town.
We actually passed by the cemetery, and everybody carries roses with them. And as we passed the cemetery gates of the cemetery, we all toss flowers in honor of Dimebag. And then we have a designated person that will gather up all those roses after we pass and places them on the grave. And you know, everybody knows that's Ride for Dime was here. Cemetery Gates was a Grammy-nominated song written by Pantera, and it's just kind of poetic to be able to do that. And I know that song is going through everybody's mind as we're passing in front of the cemetery.
Then we looped around through town, again with the police escort, and landed up at that massive club called Cowboys in Arlington. Great place to bring the motorcycle Ride for Dime to a head and party down like rock stars we are.
It kind of signifies everything that Dimebag did. I mean, he was a very caring and loving person. This is a way we can continue that, you know, through Ride for Dime. He loved education for kids, music education. There's been stories where there's a little kid at an autograph signing session, said he had a guitar on layaway. His dad's going to buy it for him for Christmas. Dime made sure that kid had that guitar before he left the store that day. He said, "Don't wait till Christmas, start now." So he was all about music education for kids, so that hopefully through Ride for Dime we can continue that dream of his.
Pantera's legacy is in their own signature sound. They stayed loved and respected because they stuck to their guns and would not adapt to the trends of the moment. They were loyal to their fans because essentially they were fans themselves, in awe of their heroes, even though they stood side by side with them on stage. Pantera's songs are anthems, their antics legendary, and their style has influenced a new generation of musicians.
Pantera were inimitable. That isn't to say that they didn't have countless imitators. They didn't really have to respond to trends that were out there or other music that was happening, because what they were doing was really unique. Even when you listen to it now, there's a timelessness to it. You know, there's a vitality to the music that still exists. And it's the same thing you get when you listen to songs by Sabbath, you listen to things by Priest, whatever. And Pantera have added so many to that store of classics, to kind of what are considered like metal's essential hits.
There was a lot of changes going on in the music business during that time, and they didn't try to go with the changes. They were the changes.
That's one of the biggest tributes you could give to those guys, is that everybody changed.
Because of them.
In my opinion, I don't think anybody can top it. Nobody can top Pantera. They were the originators of this, pushing the envelope to a certain point, which opened the door for many other bands to pursue the same type of music. But you know, Pantera was the one that started it all, and that's going to be their legacy.
It's some of the best musicians you've ever heard. I mean, I would put Vince against any drummer out there. I put Darrell, obviously, was one of the greatest guitar players ever.
I think they'll be remembered as the fans' band, the band that the fans latched onto and just kind of stayed true and blue with them the whole way through.
They were so accessible to the fans. I mean, even when they were big, you know, they'd get off the bus. Instead of running to the venue to get inside, it's like there might be 10 kids, there might be 100 kids, but you know, at least one of them would run over and make an appearance, sign some autographs, you know.
Possibly the heaviest heavy metal band, and one of the most quintessential what a heavy metal band should be.
all in all, some of the nicest guys that, you know, you would ever want to go on the road and tour with.
They created something that had far more weight than anything a lot of those other bands could really invent, because they were just talented musicians, you know, and it was just it's just like all the elements were there. It was an explosive combination, and they created something that will never happen again.
They really kept metal alive, and they directly influenced so many of those bands around Ozfest. Like, you know, every band that's on the Headbangers Ball, huge Pantera fans. They're the ones, you know, Pantera in many instances is the band that got them into playing metal.
There simply cannot be a metal band today that hasn't listened to Pantera and either responded to it or tried to emulate them at some level. That's the thing. I mean, they're absolutely pervasive. They're one of the biggest bands ever. And if you're not trying to consciously mimic what Dimebag did on the guitar, you're probably trying not to sound like what Dimebag did on the guitar. So as far as their influence, it cannot be overestimated.